I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Redmond-Knight, who is here to present a webinar titled Who Decides today. Dr. Knight is a facilitator and public health professional who helps leaders responsible for coalitions like ours, for partnerships and teams, figure out how to get people to work better together so that they can make a greater impact together than they could on their own. She does this through her consulting business, as well as her roles at the University of Kentucky College of Public Health, the University of Kentucky Markey Cancer Center, Cancer Control Program, and at the Kentucky Cancer Consortium. She has experience in and interest in group facilitation, partnership sustainability, leadership, emotional intelligence, program development, evaluation, cancer prevention and control, epidemiology, and policy, systems, and environmental change efforts. In 2017, Dr. Knight launched a website and weekly blog focused on helping people work better together. You can find that at jredmondknight.com, and I'll make sure to put that link in the chat box as well. Dr. Knight has her BA in communications, an MPH in epidemiology, and a Dr. PH in health services management from the University of Kentucky College of Public Health. Dr. Knight, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm so glad to be here. And as you look at the title, you may be thinking, what does this mean? Who decides what? Well, I've got to say, I'm currently part of a multi-component research project that has several different team members. There's different roles and responsibilities, different titles, but what we discovered early on is just because we have titles and roles, that doesn't mean there's clarity about who makes decisions. We've discovered after we're now 4 years in this process that it is really difficult to move forward productively because we really just still don't know and still struggle with who decides in different situations. So what we found is there's been a lot of assumptions on many different places, and then a lot of dysfunction, lack of trust, and just frustration, honestly. So we've got some people on our team who are afraid to do anything without talking to the whole group. And then we've got other people on the team that say, I'm just going to do my own thing because I've just decided that's what I'm going to do and move forward. And so it really makes things confusing, convoluted, and difficult. Now, I hope that you guys have never experienced this, but my guess is you probably have in some way, shape, or form. And so today's webinar is really focused on helping think through some who decides kind of situations, perhaps before they happen. And maybe not before, but at least as you've thought about it, that you can kind of move forward in a way that's really clear and really productive as you work together in the Iowa Cancer Consortium. So, well, let me switch my slides. Okay. So the first kind of step in this is to develop a list of decisions and decision makers. Now, this is probably best done initially by staff, but thinking through what are the decisions that you need to make as the Iowa Cancer Consortium. There's a lot of different ones, and as you think about it, there's probably more than you even realize. So then what you do is you make your list, both of decisions and decision makers. I find it particularly helpful to start with kind of broad categories of decisions, types of decisions that you might need to be making or around certain areas. And then within that, you get a little more specific and you get a little more detailed about the specific decisions that need to be made in each category. And I know this can maybe even seem overwhelming at times because the list could be long, but trust me, it's helpful just to write it out. You don't always have to assign different people to everything. It doesn't have to be an overwhelming process, but at least you know the kinds of decisions that are needing to be made. And then you can think about, as the decision makers, who those folks might be best for those decisions. Based on their roles and responsibilities, based on their involvement in the Iowa Cancer Consortium, what does that look like? And so that, again, like I said, is probably best done initially with staff. And staff can start this process out, but then, of course, to move forward, you've really got to get input from others. So next, I'll show you kind of an idea of potential categories of the types of decisions that you need to make. So you see there's cancer plan meetings, financial management, work group implementation, fundraising, membership, communication, evaluation, staff and volunteer management. There's a lot of different areas. And your graph, your matrix may look a little different once you sit down and do it. This is just an example that might be related to some of the areas that you guys find you need to make decisions with. So with Cancer Plan, this may be voting on goals or objectives or strategies or priorities. With meetings, this may be meeting schedules, frequencies, the content, the logistics. Perhaps workgroup implementation as well. Which strategies do we choose and how do we bring on new members to our workgroup? Evaluation, one of the things that is often important yet difficult to know is who decides what you want to evaluate. What are the things that are going to be evaluated and who makes those decisions? Membership, who decides on who's a member of the Iowa Cancer Consortium or who is going to be on the board? And again, this may be in part as part of your bylaws, but it may not be clearly delineated who is making decisions in these different areas. And I'm telling you, it's so helpful to really think about this. Staff and volunteer management is another one. Who makes the decisions about hiring and firing? Is it staff or are there board members or board leadership or other people involved in that too? What does that look like? And again, you may have thought about some of these, but there may be some areas that you really haven't thought about. So as you look at your structure as the Iowa Cancer Consortium, there's a lot of different people involved in a lot of different roles, from your board to your work groups, to your committees, to your staff, to your individual and organizational members. And then with each of these, there's chairs and co-chairs or vice chairs. And so, there's a lot of different folks. And I'll tell you, there's really a balance as you're working with different groups of people. You want them to feel engaged and you want them to feel valued and that their input matters and that you want them involved in some decisions. But yet, depending upon the groups and the level of involvement they want to be in, they may not want to be involved in all the decisions. I'm sure, actually, I know they won't want to be. So you don't want to overwhelm them with involving them so much that they stop reading your emails, they stop answering your phone calls, and they're like, whoa, they've got to figure it out. I'm tired of helping them make decisions that they should already be able to make. So again, coming up with that balance of engagement versus overwhelm is important. And you guys can figure that out. And you probably have a sense of it based on participation. So again, looking at your org chart, here are several potential decision makers that you can consider. So of course, you've got the executive director, Kelly, and then you have staff, which you could have separate staff in different places, different boxes. You've got your board of directors, chair, co-chair, vice chair, then the board of directors overall, your work group chairs and co-chairs, and your work groups, and then your committees and your committee leadership and committees, and then your members. And again, there may be others in here as well. As you think about this, it's kind of amazing the number of people that may be involved or may not be involved in some of your decisions. And again, this is not something to overwhelm you to say, oh my goodness, everybody needs to be part of everything. Not by any means. But it is helpful to know who's part of what to help set those expectations. And again, per my opening story, you can have roles and responsibilities all day long, and those are really important. But sometimes we skip the part of decision making as part of those roles and responsibilities. Again, my opening story is case in point. We thought it was really clear. This person's the co-PI, this person's the research lead, this person's the project manager. This is easy, right? No, it's not necessarily easy unless you really have a conversation. So I'm just going to encourage you again to have this conversation, and that gets to our next section. But the other piece is most people who are involved in your Iowa Cancer Consortium have probably been a part of other teams, other networks, other boards, and they come bringing different expectations and assumptions of what those roles look like and what decisions they might get to make. So again, I'm encouraging you guys to think about having the conversation rather than making those assumptions. And again, there's a lot of different people who may be involved. So what I thought I would highlight is a couple of examples as we think about this, the decision maker. And later in the webinar, we're going to provide a little broader table, if you will. But here's an example, thinking about your cancer plan. So you may have developing your goals and objectives. Who does that? Maybe your work groups take a first stab at those. Voting on them. Maybe the whole membership does. Prioritizing them. Is the board of directors the ones who do that or somebody else? determining strategies, perhaps work groups, perhaps others. So again, you can think of, there's a lot of different people that may be involved or not involved. And again, this is up to you all to decide what makes sense for you. Now, what I will say is my experience in Kentucky particularly, we kind of have taken different roles in different places. So for instance, we do have our teams and networks really developed our cancer plan goals and objectives based on experiences and things like that. Then we have our entire consortium membership vote on those goals and objectives. Say, okay, is this really still what we want to do? And these are the areas we want to move forward on. Then when it comes to strategies, we actually have our work groups, or our teams or networks is what we often call them. We have them come up with the strategies based on their experience, based on the evidence, and those then get put into our cancer plan. Sometimes we don't, of course, have work groups or teams for every area of the cancer plan, but we do want to include the whole continuum. So in that case, a lot of times it's the staff who spend a lot of times on those strategies and those the objectives as well. But the strategies, look at the evidence, look what exists that we could include, look at other cancer plans from other states, and then we pull in a couple of people who may have shown an expertise in that area, even though it may not be one of our priority work groups. And that person helps really kind of hone in those strategies that we can include. Another example is meetings. And I know as part of the consortium that there's always a lot of meetings. And you may be thinking, oh my goodness, maybe too many meetings, maybe not enough meetings. But part of what needs to be decided is, how do you decide that? The schedule and the frequency. You know, if we think about board meetings, how often do you meet? And you may have already decided that, but you may even want to check in and say, is this working for folks? What about the content? That's an important piece of meetings. And sometimes I know for me, I tend to actually get too much input. And so it may be helpful to kind of say, all right, who are the people, maybe the leadership, who are going to provide content? And then logistics tends to be staff, and I think probably will continue to be. Again, one example, what we have in Kentucky, one of our groups is called our Lung Cancer Network, that pulls together lung cancer prevention and early detection from a lot of different areas. And so in terms of scheduling and frequency and time, we actually recently did an electronic survey with all of our members and said, okay, how often do we meet? How do we meet? Is it in-person webinar? And what time of day is best to meet? And so that is driving now how often we're meeting and what that looks like. Now, the content for this lung cancer network, I've got a group of kind of a leadership group from that group. And it's not just a chair, co-chair. I've actually got a small group, because what we discovered is chair, co-chairs were still overwhelming and people didn't want to do it. It was just kind of scary. So we have a team of like 5 people kind of key in these different areas that I can just email and say, what are you guys thinking based on climate? What's going on? What do we need to focus on? And then again, logistics is a staff role where we kind of make sure the webinar is in place. If we're doing a webinar, the in-person meeting, we've reserved the location, and we've got just snacks perhaps, and those kind of things that are available. So again, those are a few different pieces, but they can be really important in terms of who's making the decision to keep that clear, again, from engagement, but not overwhelm. So the next step is to really, you've thought about the list, you've thought about the potentials, is discuss and determine your best plan for decision making. And again, you're going to take that list / matrix, if you will, that's developed by the staff and bring it to the board of directors and maybe other folks as well. You may want to include work group chairs if they aren't already part of the board, or maybe committee chairs or things like that. But come up with who you want to be part of this discussion and decision making for decision making. So the first step in that will be really to review the matrix. I really recommend, like I said, having something to start with rather than just starting from scratch, because you could be there forever coming up with all these things. So it's nice to have something started, particularly by staff, that then can be reviewed by those participating. And then within that, I think you decide and you discuss the format for making your decisions. So one of the things that's going to need to happen is, and this will vary by group, and we're going to expand our matrix, is will it be over email? Will it be decisions are made in person, online, electronic survey? How does that work? And so it's really important to kind of discuss as a group how this will work. Now, that discussion is usually best done in person. It can be done online, and especially if folks have video, I think that is a place it can be done. But once people have a chance to review, it's really best done in person meetings. The other piece to consider for this is you may want to include an outside facilitator to guide that discussion. That's something that honestly we really need in my team that I mentioned at the beginning of this, is we really need somebody outside to help us kind of think through and work through some of these tough discussions so that we have clarity about who decides. Now, in your situation, it may be that folks are pretty comfortable. There's not a lot of disagreement right now. It may be a place where you can comfortably sit together and discuss, as well as being decision makers all in the same room, and move that forward. And so again, that depends on your situation and what you're discussing. The other piece is not all decisions may be up for discussion. So there may be something in statute that you have to do as the cancer consortium, and there's maybe somebody assigned to that. The board of directors will prioritize the plan. I mean, that's probably not in statute, but that could be. There may be something in a contract that, again, decides who decides. So it may not be everybody's deciding everything. But one of the things I encourage you is, if there are those situations, is to just let the board or whoever you're going to bring together to decide who decides know that those have already been decided. Keeping that transparency open is really, really helpful and important, and includes engagement for future situations when you've been that open and honest. So as you can see, the matrix has grown. We've gone from 2 to 4. But I think this is really kind of what you can work with. And I'm working on developing some worksheets for you all based on all the different webinars I've been doing, so that you can take these and kind of apply them even further. So stay tuned. I'm trying to connect with my design guy to make them look pretty, because that is not my skill set at all. But I'm getting it together. So in this place, you've got your decision maker, which you've already thought about at the very beginning. I think this was started by staff. But then the other pieces that are important in this is the method, how you're going to get this feedback, as well as the frequency. Some things, voting on the cancer plan goals and objectives for a 5-year plan, maybe once every 5 years. And maybe you do it for electronic survey. Maybe you do it in person with dots. And again, this could be tailored to you and what makes sense for you. And so you can see it's just helpful, though, to think through how this works in a real clear way. So then the next piece is to really just make decisions about who decides, which I know kind of sounds strange, but again, I'm telling you, it's so helpful that everybody is clear on who's deciding what, so that you can move forward together. This can be done in person or via electronic survey. In person, I think is generally a great option if there's pretty much good discussion and agreement. There's not points that are really people are struggling with or trying to decide. This can be done dots, sticky notes, folder paper. This can be done in terms of, you can have gone through kind of your whole list and say, do we want to vote on it as a whole? Or if there's some discussion or some areas where you're not super clear, then maybe you vote by sections. Again, depending upon how long your list is, you may not want to look at every single area, but that may work as well. Electronic survey is really nicely done, particularly if people need a little more time to think. And if there's been some discussion and some struggle with who is deciding what, then that may be an opportunity to say, you know what, let's pause after this in-person meeting. Let's ask for recommendations from folks on how things might be tweaked or tailored or adjusted in terms of your matrix. Then provide an electronic survey that allows people to provide their recommendations on how you move forward together. Again, keep it brief. And as you know, with any survey, give a deadline. Because if there's no deadline, it's really hard for people to know when they need to turn it in. And so then they just kind of, the tyranny of the urgent happens. And so everything else is urgent because it doesn't have a deadline. So then the next piece is really to disseminate your decision-making plan and process. This is one that I'm going to say probably is led by staff again. You know, everyone may have a part in sharing that with your work group members, with your membership and those kind of things, but staff are going to be the ones that really kind of lead this in many situations, and making sure people know what's going on. And again, this is something that you may want to have an overall document that kind of includes the high points for each of the areas of decision making and an overall matrix, if you will. The other piece is you may want to have kind of one-page documents that really focus in on your work groups or your committees or your board and what kind of decisions really apply to them. So why do we do this? Well, I've got 4 reasons. There's probably more than 4, but these are the 4 that really I've seen work well, and the reasons behind doing what we're doing. One is it increases trust. So again, my opening story is just a picture of lack of trust. And if any of you have read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, I highly recommend it if you haven't. But it's a nice kind of fable, if you will, that talks about important things of a team. Well, the number 1 dysfunction is lack of trust. And I tell you, there's just nothing that kind of causes trust struggles when you're working in groups and teams than not communicating expectations about decisions and who gets to decide and who doesn't get to decide and what that looks like. So by setting this up and really communicating this clearly, it's going to increase trust. It demonstrates transparency, which again helps with the trust piece, but it kind of shows, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it. We want you to be a part of it. This is what your role is. And it really kind of helps people say, okay, they're being open. I want to get engaged in that. I want to be part of that. It improves productivity because you're not pausing to say, ooh, who do I need to include in this decision? Is it everyone? Is it just one person? How do I go about this? And so if you have a clear plan for how you make these decisions, it helps people clearly know, all right, here's the plan. Here's how we move this forward. Let's keep being productive, implementing our priority areas, implementing those strategies and things like that. The other piece is it provides clarity about roles and responsibilities. I must say that, again, before this team I've been on, I kind of thought roles and responsibilities, decision-making were one and the same. If you have a role, then it's clear what you need to decide on. That's not necessarily the case at all. And what I've discovered is, those are 2 different conversations, both important. And decision-making is a piece of the role and responsibility, but it's not the whole thing. And by having this, it really helps put some more definition around roles and responsibilities themselves. So what do you create? And I've kind of talked about this a little bit when I started the dissemination conversation, is maybe you create a 2 to 3 page overview document. And maybe it's a 2 to 3 page table that has the decisions, decision makers, the method, and the time frame. Perhaps you also create kind of some 1-page versions that are tailored for each group or role, and so they each know what's going on. Some folks may want to see the whole picture, and some people may just say, you know what, I'm part of this work group. What does that mean for me? Or I'm part of the membership. What does that mean for me? What are my expectations and how much time will it take? Because honestly, when people are considering even becoming a member of something or becoming a board member, part of the thing that takes the time is being involved in decisions. And so if you have a sense of what decisions need to be made, then you have a sense of how much time that's going to take for somebody to participate. So where do you include it? One obvious place is going to be to include it in bylaws. And you may have already done that in many ways within your own bylaws. But I've got to tell you something that's going to make some people very sad. There are many people that never read bylaws. I know it's really sad how much time you've probably spent on your bylaws, but there are people who have never looked at them and will never look at them. So include them within it, but not just there, because they may never get seen if they're only in the bylaws. Another place may be as part of an MOU. It could be formal or informal. I don't know about you all, but in Kentucky, one of the things that we've discovered is a formal MOU can be really tricky right now with our state health department. They have to go through a bajillion channels of approval. And so anything formal we're not really doing, but informal, we're communicating and making sure we've got those expectations set. Another good spot will be the website, where people can click on and know, oh, this is who's making decisions. And again, how do I want to get involved? Then the other piece is if you have new member packets, that can be helpful too, to say, okay, this is my expectation depending upon the group I'm in and how I'm going to be involved in the Iowa Cancer Consortium. So then how do you send this out? I would recommend, first of all, sending by email. Email kind of ensures everybody gets it. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to read it, but at least they have it if they want to refer to it. Another way is going to be to present during meetings. These may be online or in person, and it doesn't have to take up an entire meeting by any means, but it kind of can help set the expectation at the beginning of the meeting, especially if you are working in a work group or a committee or board or any of those, and you want to make some decisions by the end of it, by setting up kind of expectations for what's going to be covered and then how the decision is going to be made is really helpful for people to be engaged in that process and feel ownership, and then know that they're going to be expected perhaps to do an online survey right after this, and hopefully they will do it. So when do you do this? Well, really once finalized, once you've developed a plan, once you've got your tables and matrix, you send it out. Also, when there's new members, and that could come at different times. I don't know how you structure your membership, if it's a rolling kind of situation or if you have certain periods of time where you have new members. Either way, make sure the new members are getting this information. And then as needed, to remind and reinforce how you do things and what that culture looks like. Honestly, it may be worth doing at least once a year in some way, shape, or form, so that people are still clear about, okay, this is what my expectations are for this year. This is what I'm deciding on. And this is who's responsible for making what decisions. So I'm going to pause here for just a little bit and see if you've got any questions. I'll end with a little more reminder and review and things like that, but I want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. So take it away if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. As a reminder, a couple ways to ask questions. One is within the chat box. The other is by raising your hand. So we'll pause here. And while we're waiting, I am going to add the events link again to the chat box, so everybody has access to that. Any questions? Doesn't look like there are any right now, Jennifer. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on the chat box if you want to continue, and we'll let you know at the end if there are more questions.
That sounds great. Okay. So as a reminder, here is kind of a simple process for deciding who decides. You develop your list, both of the decisions that need to be made and the decision makers. You discuss it with your staff, with your board, whoever you kind of think need to be part of that discussion and decision of developing your plan. And then with that group, that same group, you determine what your best plan is for making decisions. And then the last piece is you disseminate that. You share it and you really act on it. It becomes kind of a working document that you can use and really provide some clarity. You don't have to assume, you just have a sense of, oh, this is what I'm doing, this is who's doing it, and how we move forward together. So again, as a reminder, create your own matrix. So once you've thought about these pieces and parts, you can then fill in for your own decisions. And as we talked about at the beginning, there's a lot of different types of categories that decisions may be made in. But think about them, and you don't have to make every category have decisions. You may broad base say, you know what, we are going to have all of logistics for everything be staff, or you know what, we're going to have evaluation be this one group really focused on that. But you may, as you think about it, say, oh, maybe not always. So again, do some thinking about it, figure out what makes sense for you. And then kind of action steps, as I like to have for each of these, is I would love for you guys to schedule 15 minutes before this Friday to really think about the types of decisions that you think are important for your role in the Iowa Cancer Consortium. So think about that, make a little bit of a list, and then email them to Kelly, which I know you have her email. I don't even have to put it here, but just in case, email those to Kelly. Then I'm going to encourage you to visit my website, as Kelly mentioned at the beginning, jredmondknight.com. And so in that place, I'm going to have more ideas and suggestions on decision making in my blog posts. So as she mentioned, I try to blog weekly and provide all kinds of different situations on helping people work better together, really. And so a lot of that ends up being related to decision making and who decides, and kind of some more practical steps on that. And then if you have questions after this, and you think, gosh, I wish I would have asked her, or, oh, I would like to learn more about some other topics and areas, you may email me at jennifer@jredmondknight.com. Again, that's jennifer@jredmondknight.com. And you can see that in the screen here. And so that is it for content. Kelly, any final thoughts or questions that have come up?
No questions that have popped up. We did put your email address in the chat box, so folks have it there as well. And of course, anybody is welcome to send me questions, and I'm happy to follow up with Jennifer as well. So I am also going to put a link, one final link in the chat box here, and that is to our evaluation of this webinar. We'll also send it out in the email that comes with the video this afternoon. So Jennifer, thank you so much. As always, we sure appreciate all you do, and we're so lucky to benefit from all your wisdom. So thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who attended and participated today. We appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Yes, and I look forward to seeing you all next week on Do We Delegate or Not? I forgot to mention that, but that's one that's really tough too sometimes, is how do you make the decision whether or not you delegate, and what does that look like in working as the Iowa Cancer Consortium?
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. And you can register for that session by clicking on that canceriowa.org/events.aspx link. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.